Hi everyone, I'm Literary Freak 11 and I'm going to be doing kind of a similar thing to what I did last week, but this is not going to be favorites. This is just going to be nonfiction books, and I feel like because I like fiction so much more, it's just not on par with fantasy and the fiction that I read. So in order to discuss the nonfiction books I've read, I really kind of feel like I have to do it in a separate video because they're just not comparable and they're not going to be my favorites no matter how much I enjoy them and no matter how life-changing they are. I'm also not scripting this video, so this might be a little bit more stilted. Without further ado, I'm going to start on the first one. These are in no particular order, unlike the last list. So first I'm going to be talking about Hamilton and Peggy. And so this is kind of a dramatized account. So it's kind of like The Crown, where all of the events are historically accurate, but the drama and the internal mechanisms that they display are kind of artist renderings. So this is kind of the same thing with Peggy Schuler, something I really don't know how to pronounce it. And her family, her father is a general during the Revolutionary War, and her sister marries Alexander Hamilton, and they kind of become friends, but it's about her personal story as well, because she's very outspoken for the time, and she kind of is a very strong female character, so it's really mostly her story, but also how she interacts with him, and it was just very good. There are some parts that kind of dragged a little bit, and it covers a very broad timeline, so maybe you get 4 different snippets in a year so that it can cover the entire span of the war and what's happening with her father, because sometimes he falls out of favor. This is about the drama and everything that she witnesses as she goes through the war, and I would give it probably a 3.5. It was pretty good. Again, it dragged a little bit sometimes. Moving right along to Hillbilly Elegy. I am literally filming this video because I have to return this book to the library. It was super good. The next 2 books I'm going to talk about are kind of snippets of a type of life that most people don't really see or know about. So this talks about the Appalachian family, so that's Kentucky area. His family is from Kentucky, but because of a large industry boom in Ohio, in Michigan, and all of these kind of states, a lot of the people from those areas kind of moved up to Ohio, and so it's about this kind of dichotomy between the Ohio living and the Kentucky living, but it's also about the lives that people lead there, and they're very different, and he talks about the problems, why people there are so poor, the political demographic shift, but he also does all of this through telling his personal story, and he kind of rose above it. He went to Yale. He explains how he got out. He had supportive family members who were actually not his parents. He was not very connected with his birth dad, but through his grandparents, and this is a very popular book right now. I would give it 4 stars. It really took me a little bit to get into it because I was not in the mindset to read it. My mom wanted me to read it. It didn't suck me in immediately, but it is a very interesting perspective on small town life, on the Appalachian culture, and why they face the problems that they do. And he kind of says that it's not laziness, but it's that they think that they're being productive, and really they're kind of just receiving government subsidies. The next book that is The Last Cowboy, and that is actually about a family who have owned this land in Utah and been ranching for 150 years, and they want to maintain this ranch because it's family land, it's a family tradition, but they also can't afford it because ranching isn't a super lucrative profession, and the land gets expensive and you need permits to move the cattle through all the things. So a lot of them actually do rodeo, and it's crazy dangerous, and the amount that they get injured and then just pick back up and go again, they're oh, I've just been to the hospital because I was thrown from a horse and it fractured my collarbone or something like that, broke my leg and whatever, and they don't even take time to adequately heal, and this whole ridiculous culture around rodeos, but their family is massive on rodeos, has won like the Vegas rodeo, which is I guess like the World Series of rodeos. Like people in their family usually place in the money, as they call it. I love this book, like 4.5 stars. It was, firstly, I love Utah and the scenery is just beautiful. And also at the end, they kind of talk about this like compromise that they found in order to maintain the ranch and the cattle. They actually have like tourists like come and they stay there and they get to like ranch cattle and stuff. So it's really cool to see how they kind of resolve this like family conflict in like the changing culture and the changing times. Next, I'm going to be talking about 3 books that are very fact-based. They have, you know, pages and pages of sources in the back, and a lot of them like really, really changed my life. And so the first one of that is The Vegetarian Myth. Right now, I'm going to say 5 stars, fabulous book, because she essentially breaks down a lot of the things that people think of when they think about vegetarianism. So you're doing it because you want to save animals, but then she talks about, you know, what is an animal? What is important about life when you think about plants and how plants have mechanisms of communicating, how some plants grow in communities and they like to be in communities, and to say that they have no feelings at all is kind of a misnomer and is not accurate. But also the fact that if you want to protect life, think about the microbes that are being destroyed in agriculture. And she argues that agriculture is actually more harmful because we're destroying the topsoil. But also when you have ranching, you destroy the land and that's it. You know, if a pest or a couple insects are like in your property, unless it's harming the cow, they're not going to be gotten rid of. However, agriculture, every year, you know, thousands and thousands of animals and different species, as they invade, are killed in order to produce these crops. She also breaks down things that people think are healthy alternatives, like soy, how really, really horrible they are for you, how eating more than 2 cups of soy a week causes reproductive issues, memory loss, and also, you know, makes you angry and malnourished. She was a vegetarian or a vegan for 10 years and did irreparable damage to her body. And this is the case. I've also seen Blair White on YouTube talk about the same thing, where she was a vegetarian for a long time, and she has chronic problems that cannot be fixed because of being a vegetarian for so long. It was just an absolutely powerful book. Next, and the only other book that I actually have a copy of, is Liberalism, Find a Cure. And he doesn't talk about a cure very much. I honestly gave this book like 3.5 stars. But he does like categorize in an organized way what the problem, and honestly I think this is a misnomer, and that was like, I literally took a whole star off because this says liberalism, but it's not liberals. This is not, these people who call themselves liberals that he's talking about in his book, not real liberals. They are progressives, and that is totally different. And I would like to be able to call myself a liberal. I'm not a progressive, and that's really what he's talking about, but he lays out the problem, the logical fallacies in their arguments. You know, for instance, like I did a lot of underlining. I could kind of pick this book up and kind of pull points and be like, okay, this is hypocrisy, this is not, you know, functional. He talks about, you know, racism against white people being a problem. He talks about, you know, the breakdown of the family. He just covers like a lot of really important issues, and it's hard for me to lay out his arguments as well as he does, so I'm really not going to try. They talk about how Father's Day and Mother's Day are a problem because they might offend people who, you know, have 2 fathers, 2 mothers, blah, blah, whatever, and they're just so offended by everything, and it just needs to stop because they are, the point is that his whole point in this book is it's a slippery slope and there's no place for it to end. The last book in the list of books that like really are kind of fact-based, have a lot of sources. That book has like tons of footnotes. The Boy Crisis. Now this book is about how boys in our society are affected by the changing in mentality. So after World War II, we stopped needing boys to be heroes and warriors, but we still kind of expect it of them And so we're in this transition phase where we don't necessarily need them to be that, but that they're raised to be that anyway. But then he also talks about, firstly, ADHD, which, I connected to a lot. It's a massive problem that affects mostly boys, but also affected me. He also talks about the dad crisis, how we have a lack of dads. And he has pointed out that of like the 27 major mass shootings in our country, 26 of them have not had father figures. Daily skills that dads teach kids, boys and girls, like how to be teased is an important skill that dads teach boys, so when they can't express their aggression properly, and he says this many times in this book, boys who hurt us. And he also talks about and provides tons of resources for men and boys who are depressed. 75% of suicides are male, and so resources for that, resources for how to raise your boys in this type of world, how to make sure that they have jobs that are oriented to their skill set, that they're not shunned for having jobs that might be more socially focused. If they're good with kids, if they're good with, old people, and they're discouraged from these professions, but we don't want to be doing that, obviously. And he actually is a feminist. He's done many feminist talks, so he comes at it from a feminist lens, and I think that's important. The last two books I'm only going to talk about very briefly. One is Murphy's Law Complete, and this is just a fun resource, and I read the whole thing because I felt like it. They have things like Cole's Law, thinly sliced cabbage. There's no point in making anything foolproof because fools are ingenious, like funny things like that. So it's good to it's kind of fun to just keep around and kind of like open a random page and be like, this is hilarious. Moving on. And the last book, which also falls into the funny category, is Brain Droppings by George Carlin. If you have never picked up a George Carlin book, you should, because it's just like a good aggregator of like all of his hilarious things, and you read this and you're like, yeah, this is basically our society, and it's super funny, and it's a good way to release stress, kind of just laugh at things. That's all I have for now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Put out new videos every Wednesday. After this week, we're going to be going back to the normal format, which is me theorizing, but I really just wanted to take this moment to talk about what I read. If you want more videos that are about books on my channel, please let me know. I will definitely do book reviews of books throughout the year instead of just waiting for the end and then making one really long video. And links to social media are in the description.